What, in your opinion, was the impetus for the acquisition?
Well, I think there's a couple of motivations. One of which is that it's becoming more and more difficult for Southwest to find growth opportunities. In 2009, it shrank for the first time in its history in terms of capacity. Uh, Earlier this year, its deal with WestJet fell apart. And there's also the opportunity to add 52 737s and a number of 717s at a price that is well below the market. So if you look at those three factors, I think there's a pretty strong case.
Is this a departure for Southwest Airlines, or have they done this sort of thing in the past?
They've done it twice before. This is certainly the biggest acquisition they've done. But in the late 1980s, there was an airline called Musair that had been founded by Lamar Muse, the president of Southwest, who left the airline in a boardroom disagreement. And Southwest agreed to acquire Muse, which he subsequently launched. They renamed it TranStar for a bit, and then they eventually folded it effectively into Southwest Airlines, and it disappeared. In the 1990s, they acquired an airline, Morris Air, that is a rather interesting story. The most interesting thing about it from our perspective is perhaps that the fellow who was running it was David Neeleman, who of course went on to launch JetBlue. So AirTran is really the third time that Southwest has done this kind of thing.
Why choose AirTran?
Well, I think there's a couple of reasons. Number one reason is you get into Atlanta, which is really the largest sort of legacy airline hub that Southwest doesn't have a presence in. Again, you get the opportunity to add a number of airplanes that it would cost far more to purchase or lease if you could find them. You also get a workforce that is considerably lower paid than the Southwest workforce. So you're not going to create problems with your own workforce. You're not going to be in a position where you're having to raise the salary of the Southwest workforce to bring it up to the AirTran level. So from that perspective, it's kind of the ideal situation. AirTran's unit costs are actually lower than Southwest's if we don't include fuel purchases.
Are the route networks complementary?
I think they are. Southwest is primarily point to point, although it does more and more connecting. I don't know what number they're comfortable with saying. Maybe it's 15%, maybe it's 25%, but they would say they don't deliberately build connections. AirTran has kind of a mixed network where you could say that in Atlanta they run more of a traditional hub and spoke connection, but they have been de-emphasizing Atlanta for many years and trying to build up in other places.
Do you think the merger will be cleared by the U.S. Department of Justice?
I think so. Southwest is kind of the golden child at the Department of Transportation and at the Department of Justice uh, in approving the Continental United deal. One of the agreements was that Southwest would get some access into Newark. So I think that anything that's going to strengthen the low-fare airline presence in the U.S. is basically going to be welcomed by the department.
Who do you think is most affected by this?
Good question. Number one has to be Delta. They've had to compete with AirTran for a long time, but Delta is so much larger than AirTran and so much larger at Atlanta that clearly that's something they could manage. I think having Southwest come in there, the largest airline, second largest airline in the world by passengers right now, and obviously the largest low-fare carrier in the world come into Atlanta, can't be something that Delta's looking forward to. I also think a more offbeat airline that may be affected is Republic because of their presence that they're trying to build at Milwaukee and also the presence they have at Denver. Anything that strengthens Southwest at Milwaukee, and of course AirTran is building up Milwaukee as well, cannot be good news for Republic/Frontier.
Thanks, Perry.